The first year Lance was on chemotherapy, we had over 70 visits to the doctor in 1 year. I am 53 years old and I have not had more than 70 visits in my entire life. And those 70 plus visits were at the beginning of his years of disability. We still had more than 12 years to go. We are all aging, but with invisible illness or any chronic illness, your body is aging faster than normal. Lance and I knew from our 20s that we needed to live our life now because we knew that as he got older, it was going to be harder to enjoy our life. I was 23 and he was 25 when he got his first diagnosis of Langerhans cell histiocytosis. And then I was 34 and he was 36 when he received his second diagnosis of Erdheim-Chester disease. And even by that second diagnosis, he still didn't look sick. The thing about invisible illness is that the outside of your body does not match what's happening on the inside. And you don't look sick to other people. We had a dear friend, Eric, who passed away recently from Erdheim-Chester disease. But all the years that we talked to him, he always said, Erdheim-Chester disease is a pretty disease, or any invisible illness is a pretty disease, because you look so good on the outside, you would never know that that person is sick. But we knew because we lived it every single day. We dealt with all of those chronic conditions that nobody else could see. And it affected our life. It affected our life every single day. What we experienced was that people often only believed what they saw. They didn't believe what we told them. So eventually, we just decided that we had to live life our way on our terms, because every single person in this world has a finite amount of time, and none of us know when our last day on earth will be. But when you live with a chronic illness, an invisible illness, you realize that the amount of time you have is different than the amount of time that everyone else has. On a daily basis, a person with a chronic illness or an invisible illness does not have the same number of hours as a person who is not dealing with an illness, because your pain and your energy levels dictate how much you can do and how much of your life you can enjoy. You know, when Lance was dealing with all of those years of chronic illness and disability, I came across something called the spoon theory, which explained the energy levels so well. I am not going to do it justice. So if you want to learn about the spoon theory, if you want to read about it, you can find it at butyoudontlooksick.com and just look up the spoon theory.
I think the cool thing about this spoon theory is that it explains how the energy levels and the deficiencies in those energy levels are something that is pretty consistent from person to person when they are dealing with a chronic illness. So that was, it was very impactful to me to see that just because someone looks a certain way or doesn't look a certain way on the outside, their energy levels are still very significantly impacted by that chronic illness.
I think by the time that I learned about the spoon theory, we had stopped communicating with a lot of people who didn't understand and didn't try to understand how Lance's illness affected us. But I think a lot of that came from the fact that Lance and I really did our best to enjoy our life and to truly live. And we found from the very beginning, well, Lance and I loved to laugh anyway. We laughed at everything. That was one of the things that really attracted me to him in the first place, was how funny he was and his great sense of humor. And then after he got sick, laughter was what kept us sane. And we would laugh at some of the strangest things. And I think that it made people think that things weren't as bad as they were, because if they were that bad, we probably wouldn't be laughing. But honestly, it was what kept us alive for a long time. But even so, we did still tell people how sick he was and often heard he's not really that sick. And you know what? It wasn't as bad as we said it was. It was so much worse than anyone could have even imagined. But if we fell to pieces every time something was wrong, we would have lived our life in pieces. We would have never been able to live. We would have never been able to enjoy our life. There were so many things wrong with Lance's body, and there was always bad news. So we had to learn to put it in perspective. We didn't know what tomorrow had in store for us. All we knew was that we had today to live. And so that was what we chose.
When I thought about invisible illness, it made me wonder, how do you balance keeping a private life and maintaining some of your privacy with dealing with the constant skepticism or even just questions from people who aren't living that life and don't see the day to day that you're experiencing? Because I've known people who were very private about their illnesses or even challenges that they were going through in their life. And then I've known people who are extremely verbal and they share every single little thing, particularly as social media has become more prolific in how we share our lives with each other and how we communicate with one another. Those two people, right, they might be dealing with the exact same thing, but one is going to seem far more dramatic than another just because of how much information is being shared. So when you're dealing with people who are skeptical or maybe questioning the challenges or the seriousness of what you're going through, how do you balance that privacy to say, like, we want to maintain a private life, but maybe also feeling like you have to share more so that people understand that you're going through challenges? It seems to me that that is a delicate balance and one that isn't exactly straightforward from day to day.
Well, I think that that's really going to depend on every individual situation. But I can tell you that what we experienced was we started off by sharing the really big things with all of the people who were close to us, our family and our really close friends. And we started learning who could tolerate the information and who couldn't. And I realized as time went on that we were accommodating everybody else and we weren't doing what worked for us. So we started doing what worked for us. This is how we're going to present the information. This is what we're comfortable sharing. Because if you do share too much, or there are some people who it doesn't matter how much you share, if you share just a little bit, then all of a sudden there are people who think, I'm going to ask them everything. And they ask the most personal questions that were absolutely none of their business. And so I got to the point where we just couldn't do it anymore. Lance was sick for over 25 years. That's a long time for people to think that our life, just because we shared a little bit, is any of their business. And that for some reason, I have to share something, because you know what? You don't have to share anything that you don't want to share. And if people don't believe it, then they don't believe it. It's not on you to figure out what somebody else is going to think about something or what they're going to believe. And it took me a long time to realize that. So if somebody's looking for a way to balance that, and I had a lot of people say that this is selfish, but really it's not. It's about self-preservation you need to think about yourself and the person who is sick. Or if you are the sick person, you need to think about yourself and whoever your closest inner circle is, because really you're the ones that have to live it every single day. So I don't know if that answers your question, but basically you have to kind of strip it down to the basics. It's us, and the right people are going to be there when we need them. And the right people are going to believe us. The right people are going to trust us.
That makes actually a lot of sense. I think, like I said, that stuff is so complicated, and I think it can be so overwhelming because, at least I know for me in my life, the things that I've gone through that were maybe more challenging, I would catch myself wanting to kind of validate my own experience by sharing more than was necessary with someone. And it wasn't any of their business. I know for me personally, it was like I had to take a step back and say, it doesn't matter if people think that I'm X, Y, or Z, or they don't believe X, Y, or Z. That is none of my business. And I've adopted a phrase as I've gone through different challenges in life. And I say this to other people's opinion of me is none of my business. It doesn't, it's not my concern. I am only responsible for my actions, my thoughts, my mindset. Those are my responsibility, and those are what I need to be about, concerning myself with. Secondarily, it's exhausting to share maybe traumatic information or maybe just hard or challenging information over and over and over again, because you told this person this thing and now you encounter someone else and they don't know what's going on. And so now you tell it again and you tell it again and you tell it again. So sharing those stories over and over again, I would have never have guessed how exhausting that would be. When people would say, how are you doing? And I got to where I'd just say, I'm fine, because I didn't have the energy to tell the whole story again. But that I'm fine led them to believe that there was no more challenge in my life, that everything was great. So that, I guess that was the kind of bulk of my question, was this, like, how do you balance all that and get through that? Because you're dealing with people's opinions, right? Which are none of our business, but also it's exhausting.
Right. And that goes back to the spoon theory. You only have a certain amount of energy to expend during the day. And if you've got to tell the same story to 10 different people, that's just used up all of your energy. And I use that for myself as a caregiver, because I wasn't the one who was sick, but I was the one who did everything to make sure that we still had a good quality of life. And I was exhausted just like Lance was exhausted. So having to try to figure out how to communicate in a way that makes it acceptable to everyone else, I had to realize that that wasn't my problem. What I needed to do was figure out what worked for us. And if people didn't like that, they didn't like it. And it wasn't my problem.
As you were learning how to kind of disseminate information to the people around you, do you feel like you leaned toward more information or less information? And did you find that utilizing social media as it came about was an acceptable way of minimizing that impact to your energy levels, that you could write one post and put it out there and everyone could read it? Or did that create more issues because now everyone is commenting and asking more questions, and you're having to go back in and answer individual questions? Because quite frankly, that's one of the things I hate most about social media, which is why I don't have any, is
Well,
I hate that the response is more energy than I can than I can come up with. Anyway.
Right. Well, that goes back to, again, you've got to do what works for you. So I did find it easier to post on social media because it was one post and everybody that was on there got to see if they wanted to see, and they didn't have to look at it if they didn't want to. I tried to post it in a way that would give enough information that people wouldn't be asking a lot of questions. And sometimes I did get questions, and it was up to me to choose if I wanted to answer them or not. And sometimes I didn't answer them because I didn't feel, either I didn't have the energy for it, or I didn't feel like it was an appropriate question to answer, an appropriate question to ask, really. And then for our families, I would send out one text message, and that person would let the entire rest of the family know, so that not everybody would be bombarding me with questions about what was going on. And I just tried to keep people updated as I could. But really just, I don't know, I did everything I could to minimize those interactions just because it was so exhausting.
And it's time consuming as well. So it's even beyond the emotional and even physical exhaustion of those constant conversations and answering those questions and sharing information. It's just the sheer time that it takes when you're having multiple text conversations. That's time out of your day that you're not being able to do the things you need to do to take care of your loved one. Or if you are the individual with the disability or with the illness, that's taking away time for you to rest or do things that you want to do. So I think that's good to kind of keep in mind. I would say for an outsider who's engaging or interacting with someone who is dealing with a challenge or an invisible illness or a chronic condition of some sort, is just be patient and take yourself out of it and be supportive, and don't expect a response on your timeline.
Right. Well, and I'll just say it, it's very selfish for somebody to think, how dare they not respond to me, or to take it personally. I mean, I got that a lot in the beginning when Lance was first in and out of the hospital. I would send out messages letting people know that he's in the hospital, and I had to go outside of the hospital because the signal in there was so bad. I couldn't even get a signal in there. So I couldn't send any messages. So I'd have to go outside, send a message, let everybody know what's going on, and then go back inside the hospital. We're dealing with all these things. There were a few times that Lance almost died. And the last thing on my mind is, oh, I better leave Lance's side so that I can go outside and let somebody know what's going on. That's the last thing on my mind. That's the last thing on anyone's mind when they're going through a really critical situation. And I would get outside. Finally, there would be a break in whatever was happening, and I would get outside, and I would have all these angry messages from people wanting to know why I hadn't been responding to them. I mean, one time, literally, I had over 40 messages because I hadn't responded to people in the amount of time that they thought I should. And this was a life and death situation. And I get that everybody's concerned, but right now, my focus is not everybody else. My focus is my husband and making sure that I am there, because that's where I need to be. It's not about everybody else in this moment. Right now, it's just about us. And it's okay to do that. And that's the way that it should be. I think as individuals, we all need to figure out what works best for us, not in a selfish way, in a way that helps you live the best life possible. And to speak to the invisible illness side of it, from before Lance got so sick, I do want to say, just because you are unable to comprehend how difficult someone's life is. And it's not even invisible illness, it's in any situation. Just because you cannot comprehend it does not mean that it is not difficult. And judging a situation based on if someone is handling it the way that you believe they should doesn't make any sense. And to the people who are dealing with an invisible illness or chronic illness, disability, whatever it is, whether you're the patient or the caregiver, stay the course. Do what works for you and try not to let all of that outside noise make you think that you're doing something wrong.
That's really good advice. If you are going through something challenging, whether that's invisible illness or just a significant life change, whatever it is, stay focused on you and your family and doing what's best for that situation. And do not let those things derail your progress. Just keep going.
Right. And stop worrying about everyone else, because what matters when you're dealing with such a serious issue is what is right here in front of you in your small circle. What everybody else has going on, whatever their concerns are about your situation, like you said, Jenna, it's none of your business. That's something that I had to learn early on, and that's something that I followed. It's something that is not easy to learn, but what other people think of you is none of your business. So stop worrying about it and just worry about, because that does derail you, like you said. Do what's right in front of you. So I hope that this has been helpful, and thanks so much for joining me, Jenna. I will see you next time.
Okay, we'll see you. Bye.